Hello, and welcome back to the Misty Morrison Podcast. I'm your host, Misty Morrison, and this is episode 12 of Petty Please. Before we get into the pettiness, just some housekeeping. Please remember to engage with the content. If you are listening on podcast, leave a 5-star review, share it with a friend. If you are watching on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe for more, and share it with a friend. If you are engaging on socials, comment with your thoughts on the stories. Now we'll hop on over to the pettiness for today. Story number 1 is coming to us from r/pro-revenge. This is a long one. Don't lie about me to my boss. This happened around 2001 when I worked for a computer company that decided to start offering web hosting. Since the project was one of the top initiatives of our CEO, he took a very keen interest in how his pet project was going and was very responsive when anyone emailed him about any and all difficulties. While that's usually a good thing to do for customer service, it's often not so great for the poor sales guy that gets that one customer that has issues with everything. So, on to the story. I was working in my cube farm when I got a call from a cheery young lady looking to propel her boss's company into the information age and was looking to see what we could do to help her out. M is for me. CG is for cheerful girl for now. M. Hi, this is Joe the OK. How can I help you? CG. I need web hosting for my company's website and I'm not sure where to begin. M. You've come to the right place. Let's see what we can do to help. That's probably not the exact wording, but I do always try to be helpful to my customers, so that's the general gist of the start of the conversation. We went on to talk about our facility, how things work, the pricing, and a lot of other Q&A. In all, it took about 30 to 45 minutes to get everything sorted out and make her a happy camper when we ended the call. This is called foreshadowing. She said she needed to make a couple more calls and then give everything to her boss, but I should hear from her in a day or so. Fast forward a couple of days and I hadn't heard from her, so I figured I'd give her a call and find out if she was ready to go. I actually got her on the first call, rare for sales. And at that point, we'll just call her PG for Pissy Girl, because nothing that came out of her mouth during this conversation was nearly as pleasant as our initial call. At first, I thought I'd actually gotten her evil twin, but then came to the conclusion that this was in fact the same person, just on a different frequency. Apparently, after calling us, she called a competitor who proceeded to tell her all sorts of fictitious information, which she spewed upon me. PG. I spoke to your competitor and he told me a ton of lies. I don't remember what all she said, but I think he got our name right. Other than that, it was pretty much all false. M. Tries to debunk said lies. PG. He said you'd try to say that, but that I know better. I guess his lies were prettier than my truth? No idea. I have a very pleasant phone voice. I guess his was just better. I'm sorry you feel that way, but I'd be happy to go over everything and make sure you have a clear picture of what you're getting from both companies and clear up any misunderstandings if I can. PG. Nothing vulgar was said, but nothing complimentary at this point either. I believe she did cast some aspirations upon my truthfulness and perhaps my parentage. At this point, we were pretty much done. If there's anything we can do for you, please let me know. PG. Click. About 10 minutes later, I got an email in my box from the harridan that I had been copied on. I also realized that it was directed to my CEO, who I was certain was going to read it. It contained a litany of my sins, my shortfalls, my lack of ability to tell the truth, and quite possibly my severe lack of hygiene. None of which was true, especially the stinky part. I didn't realize how fast our CEO would read that, but by the time I was through reading this sternly worded missive, my manager was popping out of his cubbyhole like he'd been shot from a gun. He got an email, my director got one, and both of them wanted to know what the hell I was doing. Fortunately, I had a great rep on the floor and a couple of awards for being a customer advocate, so I wasn't hoisted up on a stake to serve as an example for the rest of the staff. It did, however, take a bit of telling the tale and swearing on an unopened copy of Microsoft Windows to convince them that I wasn't even half as horrible as I was portrayed in this work of fiction. Now, the revenge part. Upon arriving to work that morning, I got a lovely piece of spam in my mailbox. All I had to do to get all the loveliest, filthiest hardcore porn delivered to me daily was just give them my email address. Since this was before the Can Spam Act, there wasn't any of that pesky validation thing, so with just a couple of clicks of a mouse, I made sure she was fully informed on every variation of every sexual position and fetish anyone could send her. For free even, what a bargain! Not only had she emailed me from her corporate address, she even copied her home email so she could keep a copy of the dressing down she gave me, presumably so she could cheer herself up by reading it when she couldn't find anybody in the office to have fired. Not wanting her to miss out on her education into the ways of the world if she wasn't at work, I added that address too. I'm not exactly sure what transpired at that point, but knowing the Wild West of porn spam at that time, I always rest assured that her email boxes were defiled, and then defiled some more, because once they had an address, even an act of God wouldn't get you off of it. Oh. I mean, I'm glad your company knew what a good employee, what a good customer service person you were, and didn't hoist you up to be an example. So glad. Love the way you wrote this. It was fabulous. And you're right, back in the day, like, porn spam was everywhere. And I've abandoned so many email addresses in the past because once the spam starts coming, you couldn't make it stop. I feel like it's a lot easier now. Like, everything has to have an unsubscribe button. It's a lot easier now. But certainly, her email addresses were ruined at that time. I don't know if this is pro. I mean, signing somebody up for mailing lists is kind of basic in the world of revenge, but it worked well. Story number 2 is coming to us from r/pettyrevenge. I just wanted to swim. My middle school used to be part of teaching college, so we have remnants like a swimming pool, and as such, everyone from 1st to 8th grade had to learn how to swim. This story takes place when I was in 7th grade, around 2017. At that time, the middle school gym teacher, Mr. B, who had been there for decades, finally retired. This sucked because 1, he was a great teacher, and 2, he would make an effort to meet students where they were at. So rare. I'm black and have very thick curly hair. At my school, the rules for the pool stated that if your hair reached your shoulders, you had to wear a swim cap. I always tried to follow said rule, but my plastic swim caps keep breaking, and cloth swim caps could not hold back my hair. Eventually, I went to Mr. B and asked if I could be exempt, as my hair didn't reach my shoulders, and he agreed to it. So when Mr. B retired, I figured I could have a similar discussion with the new teacher, Miss W. Miss W was much younger. I wonder if we were her first class, and was a stickler for the rules. I was raised to respect my teachers, so I bought myself a cloth adult swim cap, figuring that it at least wouldn't tear. However, it became very clear very quickly that the drag of the water would literally pull the cap off my head. Several times I had my classmates stop me in the middle of a workout to let me know. Eventually, I said, "Screw it," and took my cap off. My reasoning was that all the stopping and readjusting I had to do was preventing me from completing the workout, the whole point. But when Miss W saw, she immediately started reprimanding me. I tried explaining my situation, that it was just until class ended and I could find a better one, and that I wasn't trying to cause trouble or be disrespectful. Some of my classmates even came to my defense too, but she kept saying if I didn't put it back on, she would kick me out of class. I don't remember what I did after that, but what I do know is that for the next week, I refused to swim. There were exercise bikes stationed outside of windows looking into the pool, and that's where I went every class. Miss W would try to get me in trouble, but I would just point out that I had no alternative swim cap and that I still wanted to exercise. Eventually, the school and my mother got involved. The school eventually took Miss W's side, and my family had to order an extra large cap, which took 3 weeks to ship from Australia. After being laughed at and realizing that my hair wasn't enough to fill the cap, leaving a sizable buoy on my head, I cut my hair short. After that, I went capless for the rest of my time there, and Miss W couldn't stop me. Post-revenge story. When I graduated middle school and went to my public high school, almost 1,000 in my high school class versus 32 in middle school, I was afraid there would be a repeat, especially since more students use the pool. However, I didn't even have to make my case. The coach simply said, "Yeah, that's fine." Needless to say, I felt much more welcomed in high school. I don't feel like you got revenge. Like this isn't vengeful to me. You found a way, you worked the system. They said if you have hair shorter than shoulder length, you don't have to wear a cap. So you couldn't find a cap that fit you well. She was being a stickler about it. The school took her side because it was the school's rules. So you decided to cut your hair short. There was no revenge here. Like, she didn't get in trouble. She didn't care if you had short hair. Ultimately, you just chose a different method to go by the rules. Yeah, I'm kind of disappointed in this one because I don't think it was vengeful at all. I'm happy that you've had a better time in high school than you did in middle school, but you just chose a different avenue to follow the rules. Story number 3 is coming to us from r/petty revenge. I was the only one cleaning the bathroom, so I stopped using it too. I live with 2 roommates, and for some reason, I was always the one cleaning our shared bathroom. Toilet, mirror, sink, drain, all of it. Got sick of it, so I stopped. Not just cleaning, I also stopped using it. Started showering at the gym, brushing my teeth in the kitchen, and using the bathroom at work, or this coffee shop down the street. I work long hours anyway, so it wasn't that hard to avoid. 2 weeks go by and the place is nasty. Moldy curtain, toothpaste crust, hair everywhere. Finally, one of them goes, "Dude, can you clean the bathroom? It's disgusting." I just said, "Oh, I thought we were taking turns." I haven't even used it. Awkward silence. Then they cleaned it. Now they actually kind of keep up with it. Not perfect, but whatever. At least I don't feel like I need gloves just to pee anymore. Turns out cleaning a swamp sucks way more than when you're the only one stuck in it. Yeah, it's petty. Yes, I will give you petty. That you really were dedicated. You were dedicated that you were going to be right in the end, that you didn't have to clean it because you weren't using it. And that's a good method. But to even go as far as using like the coffee shop down the street to avoid using the bathroom in the house or apartment, whatever, is dedication to the cause. But I am glad. I think they had some nerve asking you to clean it if there was never any like outlined agreement of who does what chores when. But I'm glad they got the message. Story number 4 is coming to us from r/petty revenge. She kept stealing my food, so I reminded her what it feels like to be taken from. I share a residence with a few other folks and am female 19. One of them, let's call her R, consumes my meals all the time. Not once or twice, not by accident, on a regular basis, even if it bears my name, even after I've spoken to her. In my upbringing, there was never a guarantee of food. Therefore, it's about being disregarded and taken advantage of, not simply about snacking. Once more. So I cooked brownies one day. They looked quite normal. However, I substituted salt for the sugar and added vinegar, instant coffee, and a pinch of cayenne. Not harmful, simply miserable. As usual, I labeled the container. She ate half the tray before I even got home. How could you stand to eat that? Later that night, I found her in the kitchen, visibly upset. She told me the taste reminded her of something her mom used to do, ruin her food as a form of control. I wasn't expecting that. I told her it reminded me of being a kid and watching people take the little I had like it was nothing. We haven't really talked since, but she never touched my food again. Ooh, yeah, that hit home way more for her than you thought it would, or probably than you wanted it to, but you got your point across. You didn't hurt her. You'd had conversations with her. You had labeled the food. She knew it wasn't hers. She knew she was wrong. So you finally did what you had to do to teach her the painful lesson. And that's when she understood. Sometimes people do not learn that lesson until you teach it to them the hard way. That is just a fact of life. I don't even think it's petty. It is good revenge. It is good revenge, and you taught her a lesson, and I'm glad that it worked. But just vengeful, not petty. Like, I think this went where it needed to. Story number 5 is coming to us from r/petty revenge. My neighbor kept parking in my driveway, so I parked behind him and went out of town. My neighbor's been parking in my driveway for months. I've asked him not to a bunch of times, but he always goes, "It's just for a sec," and shrugs it off. Came home last Friday and yep, there he was again. Only thing was, I was heading out of town for the weekend. So I pulled in behind him, locked up, grabbed my stuff, and left a couple of hours later. And I had a bunch of missed calls and a text like, "Dude, WTF?" But I didn't answer it. Hope he had a relaxing weekend to think things through. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Yeah, I'm glad you had an out-of-town trip and you weren't taking your car. It serves him right. You literally asked him not to park in your driveway. It's basic. It's not your driveway. If there's other parking available somewhere else and someone has asked you not to, just don't park there. He had it coming. And the fact that he had the nerve to call you and text you and ask you about it, it's not, when he parked somewhere he wasn't supposed to, it was not your responsibility to make sure that he could access his car. It was his responsibility to make sure he parked in a place where he would have access to it later. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Story number 6 is coming to us from r/petty revenge. No video for you. Tonight was my youngest kid's band concert. At the start of the program, the band teacher reminded us that the whole program was being filmed, so put all the phones away and just enjoy the show. The lights dim, the jazz band is about to perform, and Buddy in front of me pulls out his iPad. He starts a video and lifts it right up in my line of sight and rests it on the brim of his hat. I'm annoyed, but at least my kid isn't in this band. After about a minute, I'm really annoyed, so I reached out and stopped the recording. It was on his hat, so he didn't notice. Song ends, he's surprised it didn't record. Next song starts, he records and again rests the iPad on his hat brim. I reach over and stop the video right away again. He must have thought something was wrong with his iPad because he put it away after that. Okay, that one was good. That one was very good. I mean, that's just so, like, a phone is one thing. It's not that big, especially if you appropriately dim your brightness. It's not that bad. But an iPad's huge. I'm reading off of an iPad because it's bigger than my phone. So, and I know some people only have iPads or the iPad is a better camera than their phone maybe. But that's just rude. I'm with you. Story number 7 is coming to us from r/petty revenge. Quadruple my rent, will you? Late 1990s, Western country, not the US. Although the internet had been invented by then, most of the services we take for granted now simply did not exist yet. Cell phones and smartphones were still in the future. Note, inner city areas in my home country are not like inner city areas in the US. They are long-established suburbs with multi-bedroom homes owned by growing families, empty nesters, and the recently retired. Small 1- and 2-bedroom cottages are dotted between them. Some cottages are split into duplexes, with additions and extensions to add more rooms, like kitchens and bathrooms. Cottages and duplexes are usually listed as cheap rentals. In the early 90s, I rented one side of a small cottage duplex. The landlord was an older guy, partly retired. He'd spent a number of years buying cottages and duplexes, renting them out and building a passive income stream for his retirement years. He spent his time puttering from property to property, mowing lawns, and seeing to the maintenance and repairs. I simply wanted a home base. My job at the time required a lot of travel overseas, and it didn't make sense to just shove everything into storage until I was done with traveling. I would still need a place to stay when I was home, so the duplex worked for me. The rent was automatically taken from my bank account each month and deposited into his. I had similar arrangements for the utilities, etc. Every year, the landlord and I would sit down and over coffee would catch each other up on the neighborhood news, stories from my travels, and the annual rent increase. It was a bit of a delicate negotiation as I wanted to be fair, a national trait in my country, while he was taking into account that I was young and still building my career. So money was often tight, especially in those years. I had 9 good years in that duplex. I made friends with my neighbors, and folks knew if they needed some kind of help and I was home, I was happy to assist them in various ways. Toward the end of my 9th year there, I flew home to firstly get some rest after several months of hopping around the globe, and have my annual chat with the landlord about the rent increase. We had ditched using a written lease after my 3rd year in the duplex. We'd gone to a month-to-month arrangement because I was never sure if some fabulous opportunity might land in my lap, suddenly requiring me to take up residence in another country. Not having to continue paying on a lease for a place I wasn't using made sense, economically. I had offered to find new tenants for him if such an opportunity ever happened. Having been home just a bare few days, I was looking forward to meeting with my landlord. I'd gotten to quite like him over the years, and I was a good tenant for him. Wear and tear on my side of the duplex was minimal, and being away as much as I was back then, he didn't have to do a lot beyond mowing the lawn. Well, surprise number 1, his eldest son knocked on my door the afternoon I was expecting the landlord. Surprise number 2, his father, my longtime landlord, had actually retired fully and signed over much of the business to his eldest son. Surprise number 3, eldest son had a very different mindset than that of his father. There was no friendly chat, no catching up, no storytelling. The biggest surprise, he was going to quadruple the rent. He justified it by stating property values had been going up around the area. More empty nesters and retired folks were selling up to property management companies and generally raising rents over the entire area. I missed most of his justification because I was in slack-jawed shock. When I told him I flat out couldn't afford the new rent, his reply was anything but nice. Then you have until the end of the month to move out. Now, I did check into some of his statements. Rents had been rising, but nothing like he suggested. Folks had been selling their big multi-bedroom homes to property management companies. Overall, rents were 50 to 75% higher compared to 5 years prior. Quadrupling the rent? I smelt something fishy. Couple of phone calls to the building permits, people at City Hall, and I had my answer. What he intended was to use the inflated rents to help get bank financing to build more onto the duplex and turn into a bunch of high-priced apartments. I had a backyard more than large enough to put a whole other multi-bedroom house onto, but city bylaws wouldn't permit it. So this was his workaround. You couldn't build new homes into a backyard space, but you could build extensions and additions. Anyway, in just 20 days, I had found a new place to live, changed all the payment arrangements with the bank, got the new utilities turned on, and had moved everything I owned into the new place, including several hundred books and their bookcases. I had 5 days to clean and spruce up the place before putting the keys into the mailbox. Yes, you could do things like that then. It really was a different time. Let the petty begin. I was rather salty about the massive jump on rent, and the reasons behind it, and having to move so quickly. I wanted a little petty payback. I have an ex-wife who trained to be an electrician. Long story for another day. I had helped her with some of the book learning. I knew enough to safely pull off my petty revenge. As I cleaned each room, I removed the faceplates on every power point and light switch. The ex had put in several new ones, and I had helped. Making sure the electricity was off on my side and the mains, I undid the wires on the back of the power points and light switches. I then dipped the bare wires in clear nail polish. Once the polish was dry, sometimes requiring a second coat, I stuffed the wires as deeply into the wall as I could reach. The polish prevents arcing when I turn the power back on, and has to be removed when putting everything back together. Once everything was screwed back into place, there was no way to tell that the power points or light switches were now complete powerless duds. It probably took less than 2 hours, over 4 days to do it all. But the petty continues. This duplex was in a city that is semi-tropical. Think Texas heat with Florida swamp levels of humidity. Ew. Residential AC didn't exist at all. A few folks had swamp coolers, but even they struggled to cool a room. It was midsummer when all this went down. On the last day I had left, I stopped at my local fish store and picked up about 20 pounds of prawns, shrimp to Americans. With no kind of AC, many homes were built with vents at the top of the walls opening up in the space under the roof. The attics aren't sealed, which allows air to flow through the space and blow out the hot air rising from the walls and venting out the openings. They're usually about 4 inches by 2. You know where this is going, don't you? I spent a delightful hour slipping fresh green prawns into each and every vent on my side of the duplex. All 20 pounds of them. I left the keys in the mailbox as I had been instructed to do. Several hours later, I was on a plane headed for another long trip overseas. The aftermath. After my return, I called my former next-door neighbor, a lovely old lady whose cat had taken a liking to sleeping on my bed whenever I was home. Her house was higher than the duplex, and when the front door and windows were open, which was pretty common back then due to having no AC, she could see into most of the house as well as whatever was going on around the front door. Her first words were, "What did you do?" She assumed I had done something, but I never admitted to anything. She then proceeded to tell me about the saga that ensued after I had left for the final time. Eldest son waited several days before showing up at the duplex for the first time. He casually opened the door, took maybe 2 steps inside, and dashed right back out again. He spent the next several minutes bent over, emptying his stomach near the fence line. He left. Less than an hour later, 2 cars pull into the driveway, eldest son and my former old guy landlord. Old landlord gets within 4 feet of the still open door, takes a wee sniff, and falls on his ass, laughing his head off. Eldest son looks kind of pissed. Very dramatically, he grabs lungs full of air, dashes inside, and opens a couple of windows before running back out again. He has to do this several times to open all the windows and the back door as well. Old landlord goes off in fresh gales of laughter every time eldest son does his deep breathing routine prior to his next dash indoors. Several hours later, eldest son locks both front door and back doors, leaving the windows open. From what my former neighbor could see, it appears the smell hadn't abated at all. 10 days later, eldest son shows up again with someone who looks like they are in construction, as noted by my former neighbor. Construction guy walks into the house, turning pale in the process, walks around, looks at the bottom of the walls, and then exits. Sharp-eared neighbor hears him tell eldest son, "All the baseboards will have to be replaced. I'm not sure we'll ever get all the stink out though." Eldest son has a fit on the spot, while construction guy just shrugs his shoulders. 2 more days pass. A small crew of construction types arrive. Eldest son lets them into the duplex. Using crowbars, they start pulling off the baseboards. There is much swearing, especially as they have to remove and clean up the leftover, rotting carcasses of all those prawns. They are less than an hour in when they strike a problem. None of their power tools will work. I already forgot about that part. Nada zip. They tried different power points and even made sure the power was on at the mains. Nope, nothing happening. Construction crew leaves while eldest son has another fit on the stairs. Following week, an electrician and his assistant turn up. Eldest son lets them into the duplex. It doesn't take long for them to discover my other bit of pettiness. But there's a problem. To get at the wires and reattach them to various power points and light switches, parts of the walls, mostly the stinky baseboards, have to be removed. And the festering mess behind them needs to be cleaned up before the electrician can or will do his job. A very loud argument ensues. Apparently, the problem is the construction crew need their power tools, but the electrician doesn't feel it's his job to remove the smelly baseboards, nor clean 20 pounds of rotting shellfish out of the space. Impasse. From what my former neighbor told me, it eventually took over 4 months to make things right in the duplex. There were a number of disagreements over who should be doing what in respect to cleaning, repairs, and rebuilding. Word at the local coffee shop was it ended up costing eldest son more than a year's worth of quadrupled rent. And he never got his bank financing either. A full decade later, he actually sold the duplex. The new owners immediately began building extensions and eventually grew to be several apartments. I've seen the satellite pictures myself on Google Maps. This was golden. This was such a good one. You doubled down. He pissed you off. He did you dirty. He did. And you doubled down. Not only did you leave, not only did you disconnect the electricity, which I thought was grand, but the prawns. Oh, the prawns. I can imagine the smell. It would be putrid. It's horrifying to even think about. Good job. I love, too, that you had a good neighbor left that you could talk to get the story, because it wouldn't have been fully worth it without hearing the story after to enjoy it. The fact that it cost him so much. If you would have just been a good human and only raised the rent to meet the averages in the area, you probably would have stayed. So, I like this. You did the right things. It's petty, it's vengeful, and I am here for it. All right. That was 7 stories for this week's episode of Petty Please. I hope you enjoyed our dose of pettiness for the day. Thank you for being here, and I will see you next time for another episode of the Misty Morrison Podcast. Bye.